Welcome. My name is Paolo Campana. I am a professor of criminology at the Institute of Criminology at the University of Cambridge and director of the Violence Research Center at the same university. I am incredibly pleased to welcome you and welcome the fellow panelists for this webinar. We have James Sutherland from Cambridgeshire Constabulary. James is a superintendent with the Cambridgeshire Constabulary. Good morning, James. Thank you for joining us. James is on call today, so I hope you'll be able to stay with us until the end, which then means that there is no major emergency in Cambridgeshire. So thank you for joining us. Together with me this morning, we also have the other team members, research team members, Noemi Corsini, postdoctoral researcher in statistics at the Institute of Criminology. Good morning, Noemi. And Cecilia Meneghini, lecturer in quantitative criminology at the University of Exeter. Good morning, Cecilia. Thank you for joining us. So this webinar is going to last 1 hour until midday. I'm going to present the findings, the key findings of a research project called Breaking Networks of Youth Violence, which was supported by the Nuffield Foundation. I'm going to give you 10 insights from a very rich research project, and then I hand it over to James Sutherland from Cambridgeshire Constabulary, who will give us his views, comment on what we have done, and give us the practitioner's view. And then we open to the floor. We open to participants. There is a Q&A button in the Zoom panel. You can type your question at any point during the webinar or at the end. We are monitoring the Q&A, and then we will pick as many questions as possible and answer them. I encourage you to ask questions, but also give your views, your experience, and also give us suggestions about what we could do next to improve our knowledge around youth violence. Now, first, let me say, well, this webinar is the end point of a research project that lasted 18 months plus 3. And it was supported thanks to the financial support of the Nuffield Foundation. And we are very grateful to the Nuffield Foundation for making this project possible. And I want to say that the Nuffield Foundation has been an incredible funder because they let us be driven by our intellectual curiosity within the parameter of the project, but they gave us the opportunity to explore intellectually with the issue and to connect with the practitioners. I also want to acknowledge the support of Cambridgeshire Constabulary, particularly James Sutherland and all the analysts that have helped us for giving us access to the data and supporting this work for its inception. And for us, it's incredibly important to have been able to share and discuss with you, James, and the constabulary, and have this constant exchange of ideas. We don't want to be in an ivory tower. We want to be helpful. So really grateful to the Nuffield Foundation, and I know Rob Street, the director of the Justice Program, has been incredibly helpful, and he's also here with us. I wish to thank the Nuffield Foundation and the Cambridgeshire Constabulary, our two partners, for making this possible. So the full report is available. It's already available online. If you go on the Institute of Criminology, there is the Violence Research Center website. And on that website, you find a link www.vrc-crim.ac UK. You have a link, you have the full project report, but we know that we are all busy, so we also created an executive summary of 10 pages that has everything you need to know about the project. But for those who are incredibly busy, we created a one-page summary with the main findings, and you have the policy implications. We have also already uploaded the webinar slides. So the slides that I'm going to present today are already online. So you have everything there. And later on, we will also upload the video of this launch. Now the project. Well, what is the idea behind the project? Well, the idea is that violence is not an individual phenomenon. And no person is an island, would say the poet. And that is also true if we want to understand the violence. So violence is not just something that an individual commits or is a victim of, but it's also influenced, and you will see the evidence, by our relations, so our surroundings. There's been a lot of work done on understanding individual risk factors leading to violence. And this work goes back a long time, including the work that was started here at the Institute of Criminology with David Farrington and the longitudinal studies about delinquent boys in London, as they were called back then, and other studies. And we know about the individual risk factors and the individual factors. We also know, starting from the Chicago School on, that neighborhood level factors and area level factors do play a role. And these are incredibly important. And don't get me wrong, the individual factor and the neighborhood factors do play a role and are incredibly very important. What we have tried to do with our project and with our work in general is to better understand what happens in between, this meso level between the individual and the neighborhood, the area. And particularly to try to understand the impact of the relational behavior of young people on the risk of committing violence and the risk of being victim of violence. So what is the impact of the network structure on the person and the position of the individuals in this network on the risk of violence? And I think this adds to our understanding, adds to what we already know about individuals and places. We adds about the relations in the way that I'm going to show you in a second. I just want to clarify that our study, our project, looks at the youth population that is already at heightened risk. Why? Because we don't study the entire youth population of Cambridgeshire. We don't have this information. Of course, it's possible to set up studies that go into schools and collect data with survey or data using other administrative records. But we study a part of the youth population that is already at higher risk. Why? Because we mostly focus on youth that have already come to contact with the police as suspects in any type of crime event. So this is already a higher risk youth population. But even within this high risk youth population, some of them will commit violence, some others will not commit violence. And we are trying to understand whether there are ways we can identify and then target and prevent violence from happening among this heightened risk population, which is the population behind a large share of violent event. So I think this group is central to efforts to develop targeted, and I should stress the word targeted, intervention that are informed by networks and relational factors. This is the idea. So how this translates into practice? Well, it starts with police records. Police records that span the period between March 2018 and October 2021. And in these fully anonymized police records, we have 14,408 young individuals, aged between 10 and 18, recorded in multiple roles, so different roles, suspects, victim, or both. So some people might appear as suspects in some events and victim in other events. Among these individuals, we have 6,000 young individuals that were suspected of committing a crime of any type, and 1,461 young individuals suspected of committing violence with injury. Within this set, we have 139 young individuals suspected of committing violence with the use of knife. And then we have 1,968 young individuals victim of violence with injury. And a smaller set of individuals victim of violence with knife. So this is our set. And we will work a lot with the set of 6,000 individuals. This is for us the group of individuals that we consider to be at higher risk. And most of the analyses are focused on this group. I would say all the analyses that I'm presenting today, with the exception of one, but are on this group of 6,000 individuals. Okay. Now, into the findings, these 10 insights, 10 insights for the day. Let's start with individuals, young individuals, suspected of committing violence. And after I will say something about individuals victim of violence. Well, first, it's interesting, we have first insights. We have identified two populations within the 6,000 young individuals suspected of committing a crime. We have people who are solo suspects. So they have never been connected or linked to another individual suspected of committing a crime of any age, young or adult. And then we have a group, 42%, who have at least committed or suspected of being committing a crime with at least another individual. So we call this group in-network or networked, because we see that there is at least one relation. And for us, because we work with police records, for us a relation is a suspected co-participation in a crime event. Of course, if you work with school records or we work with youth services records, or you might expand the notion of relations. If you observe people in the park, in the street, in the school, well, you have an even more granular picture of relations. In this project, we work with police records. So for us, the relation is what the police records records, and it's a suspected co-participation in crime. And I should stress this is suspected co-participation because we are not interested in the outcome of the criminal justice system. So whether the person was arrested or convicted or guilty, we are not here to decide who is guilty, who is not guilty, who has committed a crime or not. We are here to understand the mechanisms behind the phenomenon and help to prevent this phenomenon from happening. So we are not a court of law. We are social researchers. That's why we use suspected. Using suspects also has another advantage that is basically what approximates the most social behavior when you work with police administrative records available to researchers. So it is a nice set, but again, doesn't say who has been found guilty or not. This is not the goal. but it helps us to understand the mechanism. So first insights. The first insight is that we have two sets of high-risk individuals, those who are connected and those who are not connected. And why does this matter? Well, it matters because it's interesting that the socio-demographic characteristics of the two sets are similar in terms of gender composition or ethnicity composition, but they differ in terms of crime-related behavior, and particularly, as you will see, they differ in terms of probability of committing violence or being victim of violence. So this is the first insight. When you, I am auto-congratulate myself. So this is the first insight. When you bring relations in, you start separating these two groups. And then second insight, you can build, and that's what we did, we built a group of the connections, of the networks that connects these young individuals, but also the adults that are connected to them. Because young individuals do not live in a separate world. They live in a world where adults individuals operates, sometimes in a good way, sometimes with bad influence. So we also have to bring the adult individuals back into the pictures, and that's what we did. So we have these 2,533 networks youth suspects, and we have the adults connected. On average, youth suspects have connection with 2.5 other individuals of all of ages. And here you see the picture. So we work a lot with these pictures. What do you see? This is a graphical representation of the network of relations and connections. Every dot on the picture is an individual. The orange dots are the young people. And the very dark gray are the adults, individuals. Interesting insights coming from the network is the following. The vast majority of individuals, this is just part of the bigger network, is the largest connected component. So the vast majority of young individuals tend to cluster with other young individuals. So the orange dots are close to other orange dots. However, you have parts of the network where you have young individuals that are embedded into networks made of predominantly adult individuals. And this is an interesting insight that we were not expecting when we started the project. So you do have people, these young individuals, that are different in their relational patterns, and they are embedded in adult clusters. An interesting insight here is, well, maybe these young individuals are a higher risk of exploitation when you are surrounded by adults, suspects. Maybe they're exposed to higher risk behavior. Maybe they are exposed to, in terms of social learning, they are exposed to skills, to activities that they change their life trajectory in a way that is incredibly detrimental to these young individuals. So what power dynamics are at play, et cetera, et cetera. And this is something that we have discovered. We were not expecting this. And we then explore our violence question. But this is something that we want to further explore in future works to try to better understand this subset of young individuals embedded into sub-networks of adult individuals, and what are the consequences. Maybe there is something that can be done there in terms of prevention and intervention, and helping them to avoid the very detrimental trajectories. Insights number 3. Well, we have identified a group of highly connected youth suspects. So these are the young individuals that have the highest number of co-suspects. So the top 5% in terms of degree centrality, that's how it's called in network terms. We have also done the same analysis for betweenness centrality. You find it in the report. So if you look at the subset of the top 5% of young suspects for connectivity, well, you will see that, well, the gender changes a little bit, so they are more male, but particularly the risk of knife carrying is way, way higher. They are more likely to be part of an adult organized crime group. So you can see it's very few of these young suspects are part of an adult organized crime group, but this percentage increases considerably with the top 5%. They are incredibly more involved in drug-related crimes, from 16% the entire at-risk suspect to 42%, almost 43. Robberies, theft, and violence. So the percentage jumps from 25% to 65%. So here is another insight. We have identified subgroups of 208 individuals over the overall 6,000 already at-risk youth that are way more likely to carry a knife, be involved in violence, be part of an adult organized crime group, etc., etc. So really at a very high risk among an already high risk youth population. And this is, in my view, an actionable point that can be implemented using the current system that police forces, but also everything I'm saying can also be applied to other criminal justice and youth services as well. It's, in a sense, it is doesn't depend to the nature of the data. We have used police records, but the same reasoning can be applied to other type of administrative data. Insights number 4. Let's now go deeper and try to establish whether there is an impact of connections on the probability of committing violence with injury. So here you have a regression model, logistic regression model. So these are odds ratio. Everything that is greater than 1 means you have a positive effect. Lower than 1 means you have a negative effect. And I want to focus. So as you can see, we model for the individual factors. We model for the individual offending behavior. But I want to draw your attention on connections. So the degree. The degree centrality is a network measure that basically captures the number of co-suspects that the person has, a young person has. And as you can see, each co-suspect increases the odds of committing violence by 30%. On top of the rest, so on top of the other factors. So we do see, and this goes back to the main point, we do see an effect of this meso level, this individual intermediate level, over and above the individual level. For the factor that we have. As you can see from our models, we don't have, for instance, adverse childhood experiences factors and other individual factors. But when we model the factor we have, we clearly see an effect of relations and connections. Now, we zoom in, and now we look at those individuals that are in network. So again, similar list of factors, and I just want to draw your attention to one factor, which is the proximity to a victim of violence. Because what we have done in this project, and it's something that very few projects have done around the world, And I can confidently say that this project is the first of its kind in the UK context. And there are probably a handful of projects, similar projects, not exactly the same, but similar projects that have been carried out in the world. So we have calculated how far a person is in the network of connections, how far a person is from another person that possesses certain characteristics. So for instance, is a part of an organized crime group, is involved in drugs, is involved in theft or burglary. This is the proximity score. We look at how many steps a person is far removed from a person. So what's interesting here is that controlling for everything else, even controlling for the number of co-suspects, the proximity to a victim of violence increases the odds of committing violence. And you see this in many different parts of this presentation. And this, I think, is interesting because what this is telling us that being victim of violence and committing violence among this set of very high-risk individuals, is connected. And this also means that intervening early with victims means we might prevent future offendings, but it also means that supporting youth suspects might equally prevent them from being victimized in the future. So there is a connection between the two, which is basically probably driven by exposure to certain risky activity, environment, and individuals. Let me just add an extra point on the probability of committing violence, and then I move to victimization. We have also looked at the smaller set of individuals, young individuals, that have committed violence with the use of a knife. So knife violence. This is a smaller set, and what we saw before still holds. So the effect of degree, so the number of co-suspects, increases the odds by 20%. What I also want to emphasize in this specific subset of knife violence, which I know it's a topic of relevance, at the individual level, we have a very high effect of being part of an adult organized crime group and being connected to drug activity. So if we want to decrease and tackle knife violence, clearly we have to tackle the connections, we have to tackle the organized crime groups and drug activity. And I just want to add one thing about organized crime group, which is another interest of mine that I'm not gonna discuss today, but organized crime group and being part of a group is another way to look at this meso level, intermediate level between the individual and the neighborhood, which is often sometimes neglected, but group structures do have an impact, unfortunately. Now, victimizations. We have in the project, we have looked in parallel and jointly, as you have seen in the analysis, at youth committing violence or suspecting of committing violence and being victim of violence, because we think that we need to take this this comprehensive approach to violence. And what did we see in terms of youth victimization? Well, this is the insight number 6. Here you have all the victims of crime. Some of them have been, 10,491, all victims of any crime. And you have people who have only been victimized. But you have a subset of, you have a part of these individuals that are also suspects in another separate crime. So the very well-known victim suspect or suspect-victim overlap. So the overlap, so this overlap is 21% for the general population of victims. But among the victims of violence with injury increases to 34%. Among the victim of knife, any type of crime with a knife involved, can be a robbery with knife, 41%. And among the violence with knife victims, we are up to 60%. So this is interesting. So this means that we have a concentration of risk. It goes back to this point of, well, we have to see violence among these very high risk populations from the two sides. And of course, also organized crime membership, which is small, goes up. Next point, we have built the network of victimizations. This is a different network. Here, I just show you, so you have people who are victims only, the greens. The blue are victims and suspects, and the red are suspects only. Well, I'm not gonna say much more about the network, but we use this network to, we actually wanted to understand this network. So insights number 7. This parallels what you have seen in insights number 4. It's just that in that case, we wanted to explain to assess whether connections had an impact on the risk of committing violence. Here we want to understand or assess whether there is an impact on the risk victim of violence. And of course, we only look at these victims. The victims of violence that do have some, well, no. Sorry. Yes, the answer is yes. The answer is yes, and the odds increase by 7%. Next, we're going to do the same thing. We look at these individuals that are victims of violence, but they're also in the network of co-suspects, because we do exactly the same thing we did before. We look at the proximity to an individual that has, who is an organized crime member, drug suspects, theft and burglary, etc., etc. And you can see that the proximity among these connected youth has an effect over and above the individual characteristics, over and above the individual crime offending behavior, but also over and above the degree. So closeness to an organized crime member, drug suspects, robbery suspects, and again, very high odds of closeness to a victim of violence. So being close to a victim of violence and being in this at-risk, very high, heightened risk group increases the risk of being a victim of violence yourself. So that is interesting. It's telling us about the relations here matters, and we are comforting that what we see here, it's similar to what the only other study that we know of that's been done looking at victims of violence on victimization has been done in the US in a very different context with high weapons, and they only look at firearms victimizations, and they look at adults population, and they do find an effect of proximity to victim of violence to victimizations. And we find it also in Cambridge here, where luckily we don't have firearms widely available. We don't have the level of crime as Chicago. It's a much nicer place to live in. And we find the same effect. That's for us I think it's interesting when you have this sort of this comparison. Insights number 8, assessing. So here we are looking at knife victimization. Similar point, we see the same. Again, connections matters increase the odds of knife victimizations by roughly 11%. Look at, once again, at the effect of OCG membership, all those OCG membership and drugs. You also have an effect of robberies. Robberies is kind of, robberies is also interesting because being involved in the robberies means that there is a certain propensity to use violence. And if you have a certain propensity to use violence, you also put yourself at risk of being a victim of violence. Finally, for the knife victimizations, we see an effect for those individuals, young individuals, again, embedded in these very high-risk networks, an effect of proximity to a victim of violence. The odds increase by 17%. Finally, this is the last insight. I know it's very rich. The full report is even richer. The last insight I want to share with you is this pairwise analysis. So what we did, we look at the joint characteristics of offender and victim. So we did a similarity analysis of suspects and victim. And here are the results. And again, we found something interesting that we were not expecting, but I think has important implications. First of all, we look at age differences between suspects and victims. So here, suspects are suspects of any age. In fact, you also have the adults. The victims are only youth, so 10 to 18. 68% is young on young violence, youth on youth. But you also have 1/3 of events where you have an adult violent victimizing a young person. So two different types here. And of course, in terms of, this for us is just a starting point. It will be interesting to see whether the mechanisms, the risk they are exposed to, the environment they're exposed to, and also what type of interventions can be developed might change on whether you are in the first set or the second set. And second, we look at the gender. And interesting enough, you have, of course, a lot of similarity. So 53% is male on male. But we also have a 20% of female on female, so same gender violence, that personally we were not expecting. And then you have male on female, and then female on male. So broadly speaking, you have gender similarity, but we have found a higher level than expected of female on female violence with injury. This is just young people, among young people. 61% is male on female, 22% is female on female, and then male, female, female, male. And I guess here, I think this is a nice starting point that can inform what type of interventions we put in place. And finally, I finish with some insights for practitioners. I think what the analysis shows us is that it's important to intervene at the first sign of network embeddedness, regardless the offense seriousness. So what the analysis, the first slide particularly has told us, but the others as well, the moment you have a co-suspect, that means that you are higher risk. No matter the reason why you have a co-suspect. It doesn't have to be a violent co-suspect. That person, a person that has a co-suspect, is more at risk than the person that doesn't. And the more co-suspects you have, the more at risk you are. So whether we have screening tools or tools that help us to assess and target resources, I think it's probably a good idea to have this extra factor. So these network-based factors could be added to risk scoring tools. It might be worth thinking around this idea of super connected youth because they have a very specific and very higher risk profile. I think it's important to identify young people connected to suspects that are also being victims of violence. And again, here I should stress we are looking at a specific set of individuals. We are not blaming the victims at all. This is not our point, and this is not what we are looking at. We are looking at a specific subset of individuals that are also suspects in other crime, and we look at, and they have co-suspects, they are embedded in these networks, and we look at proximity to victim of violence among these co-suspects. And finally, once again, I think it's important to focus on this knife crime violence nexus. And if I can add an extra point there also to this group, the impact of group, the presence of group formation in places. Call it as you wish, but the moment we have an established group configuration, that also has an impact on violence dynamics and others as well. I talked a lot. I stop here. A lot to say. James, over to you, and thank you very much for listening up to now.
Thank you, Paolo, and my thanks to you and the team. The eagle sort of observers would have seen that with the data set that Paolo and his team were looking at, this has been a very long-term piece of work, and this really is the culmination of a piece of work that started over 5 years ago. And I just want to speak briefly on a couple of things on what this research means for policing, and a little bit more widely about some of the lessons that we can draw from this for how academia and policing can work together in concert. What this provides us with is the evidence base. This is what evidence-based policing looks like. And that alone is incredibly important because we have known in policing for some time that the company that people keep is very important when it comes to crime. And round about the time I first started having these conversations with Paolo that led to this work, we were doing some fairly new work around focusing on the networks, the friendship circles that people are in, based largely on our strongly held intuitions and beliefs that that was the right thing, but without an evidence base that concretely supported it. And that is a dangerous place because without an evidence base, with only intuition, you are very susceptible to the intuitions of the next person that comes in, and changes of leadership and management. And one intuition can be replaced by another intuition. Fundamentally, what Paolo has told us is the absolute importance of the networks within which these crimes are taking place, and focusing on a network approach is absolutely the right thing to be doing. And I can't underline enough, Paolo has spoken to the scale and the novelty of this piece of work within academia. I can tell you from my 24 years with the constabulary now, this is by far the largest examination of our data that we have done with external partners, hands down, full stop. My friend and colleague, Dr. Jim Perkins at Quantico, told me recently that policing is 250 years of experience uninterrupted by progress. This is what progress looks like. This is and needs to be a foundational piece of research. And so for that, I'm extremely grateful to Paolo and his team and Cambridge University. And I'm also extremely grateful to the Nuffield Foundation that allowed this to happen and supported this happening, because what you have given us is the gift of time. Policing, the thing that is probably the biggest bar to us doing work like this and to really focusing on the root causes and then solutions towards crime, is the fierce urgency of now. We are in a constant cycle of dealing with horrible things that have happened today in the last 24 hours and focusing on them, and that has to be done. But day after day, those turn into weeks and months and years, and it stops us from actually being able to step back and look at what are the root causes and what do we as a policing service and as a wider society and criminal justice sector, what do we need to be doing? And we could not, Cambridge Constabulary could not have done what Paolo and his team have done. They have an exceptional level of skills and abilities, but they also have time. And Nuffield Foundation have given us that time, and for that we are extremely grateful. I think this represents what good collaboration between academia and policing looks like, and what it can achieve. This work originated from a time when I was the area commander for Cambridge City, in charge of where sort of Paolo lives and works. And I was looking at the Violence Research Centre website, and I noticed that they were doing some really interesting work internationally and with the United Nations, and it was all great. And I contacted Paolo and said, this is fantastic, but we have serious violence right here, in your backyard. We have children being stabbed and children dying, and frankly, we could do with some help here. So let's work together. And I'm very pleased that I was pushing at an open door, and Paolo and his colleagues were immediately keen to work with us. And even after some of our initial sort of work around trying to secure sort of staff funding and what didn't pan out, we carried on, and this ended up in the application and the grant that was received from the Nuffield Foundation, and what you can see today. So just a couple of lessons in the round around making working together, police and academics. As practitioners, police officers need to understand the different timescales that research like this takes. We very often want the answers now, today, or maybe next week, and for good reasons, but some things take time. They take expertise and they take time, and we need to be alive to that and to build in the structures where we allow that to take place, and to have patience. And some of that requires an ongoing commitment beyond the usual timescales and rotations with which police officers move through. I've had 3 different roles since this research started, and I'm about to have a 4th. If I had just handed this off to the next person, I strongly suspect that the results may have been different. And that's not because of any particular skills I have. It's simply that you need somebody on both ends to remain engaged, sometimes for very long periods of time. So support between police and collaboration between police and academia has to be based on individuals' ongoing commitment, irrespective of what their role is this month compared to what it might be next month or next year or in 5 years' time. The flip side to that is that academia needs to understand what policing and practitioners needs to come out of research. And what I said to Paolo very early on, and to his team at the many meetings we've had over the last few years, is I need to be able to explain the so what to my colleagues. We are not in the business of doing pure research for research's sake. I need to be able to translate these findings to things that we can actually action. And I think the way that Paolo has presented the insights today kind of reflects that whole approach. This is all very interesting, but the public don't pay me to look at interesting things. They pay me to keep people safe. And we need actionable evidence that will actually help that. And that is the approach that the team have adopted from the get-go. And the other thing I would say around the collaboration and how flexible Paolo and his team were in the approach was, we can wait and give time for the final outcomes, but we need engagement and help before that. So when you have actionable insights or things that we can learn from, well, we need to know that, and that needs to be in our space. So Paolo and the team have assisted with the CPD of our analysts and some of my colleagues. They peer reviewed our approach to knife crime and knife crime strategy. There has been an ongoing two-way dialogue between ourselves and the researchers for the last few years, and that dialogue will continue, because now that this stage of this work has been completed, the onus is on both Paolo and myself to ensure that these findings are understood and that they actually inform and change how we do policing. That is the most important thing, or all of this is simply very interesting, and that's not why we're here. So in relation to the actual findings itself, Paolo has and the team, I think, have given us very squarely an incredible depth, the what. It's now the responsibility of the police to consider the so what, and what do we do with this. And I think the first thing I would say is that policing is on a cusp of really being able to exploit the data that it holds on the systems. And Paolo and team have shown how that can be done. So the deep analysis of the data showing where risk is and allowing us to actually predict and get in front of these risks. We will very soon have the technical capability to put these things into action. Cambridge Constabulary, along with a number of other police forces, are in a genuinely exciting space around the use of artificial intelligence. South Wales Police is leading the way in relation to quantum computing and the rapid analysis of mass data, understanding where we should be targeting these new technologies, where we know where we can actually show that there are risks and we can predict incidents of violence and serious crime. Having an evidence base like this so we can exploit these new technologies is incredibly important and will be incredibly powerful over the months and years to come. The second thing that I've drawn from Paolo's research is the relationship that individual children and young people have between being both victims and offenders. And I think policing needs to continue to develop a more nuanced understanding and approach of how we deal with young people, because they are rarely solely victims, although that happens, and they are even rarer solely suspects. The relationship between young people being both victims and offenders is, I think, very powerful. And this piece of quantitative research sits, I think, very well alongside another very long piece of research we've recently completed in Cambridge Constabulary. And I would commend to everyone in the seminar the recently published research of Dr. Hannah Marshall, which was a qualitative piece of research embedded within our teams that deal with criminal exploitation, to understand better how should the police approach young people who are absolutely victims and being exploited, but simultaneously can be offenders and are sometimes committing really serious acts of violence. Our criminal justice system is necessarily oppositional in how it's set up, but the police can't be, and that is not our role. And we need to better understand and develop how we deal with people as both victims and offenders. The final thing that I would draw out is the importance that this research has shown on the network effect, and how we then approach that as policing and as a wider partnership. There is an awful lot of media and societal discussion, rightly so, on the knife crime epidemic and why particularly young men are committing serious acts of violence. And the answers are here in this research. It's because of their friends and the networks that they are in. And we cannot arrest and criminalize entire networks of friends. That is not what, that is not what policing can do. It is not what policing should do. But we do need to address these things. And what this research shows us is that the core goal of policing is, and has been since the days of Robert Peel, prevention. This shows us where prevention needs to be targeted, and it may be at young people that right now are not committing serious violence, but we know that the risk of them being drawn into serious violence because of the network that they are in is seriously elevated. So how then do we approach prevention? And that there is a role for police in that, but there is probably an even greater role for partnerships, partnership working and understanding this research. Because if entire networks that young people are in, their entire friendship circle is moving in the wrong direction, we can't criminalize and deal through pure policing with that. That needs to be partnership led. It is social workers, teachers, properly funded youth work and diversionary schemes. That is what will help us prevent knife crime and more young people from being victims of knife crime and murder within Cambridgeshire and wider. And that, I think, is, for me, the main takeaway from this. We need a preventative approach. This tells us where the risks are, and the approach needs to be partnership-led. There will always be a role for the police in this, and I think one of Paolo's findings has shown beyond any doubt whatsoever that OCGs are toxic to young people, and we as the police service that must give no quarter to adults who seek to exploit children. We must relentlessly pursue those. But the young people are the victims of this. This is where a partnership approach and that prevention approach needs to be targeted, and research of this type helps us target all of our limited resources to the place they can make the biggest effect. So I give my sincere thanks to Paolo and his team and to the Nuffield Foundation for allowing this research to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, James. We are at midday. I just want to say one thing, that we got a couple of questions in the Q&A. James, it's been a real pleasure working with you and constabulary and made this long continue. You have tell us many interesting insights. You have also answered to many of the questions that are in the Q&A, because some questions were about, well, how can the police forces and youth justice service be assisted to make best use of their data? And the answer is, well, knowing what data thinking relationally is important, and then sharing the information in a way that is proportionate and ethically considerate. But this partnership is, I think, really important. And the goal, and you as you made out clearly, the goal is not enforcement. The goal is prevention. The goal is prevention. And I also want to answer another question, I think, too, and linking to what you have said, that goes back to, there was a question about organized crime group and a question about gang matrix and concern about disproportionality, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to say this, we have to find the right balance, and that's what James, you also said, we have to find the right balance between on one side, let's not ignore the fact that this group structure have on young people and communities as well, the predominantly youth structure, they are there, they exist. Unfortunately, the world will be a better place if they didn't exist, but they exist. At the same time, we have to avoid disproportionality. We have to avoid over-labeling, particularly when it comes to young people and children, because we know that there's a detrimental effect and it's ethically wrong for many reasons that we all know. So we have to find the right balance, but I think sharing, having multiple partners at the table, having a prevention as a goal, having the knowledge that the group exists, but also having the knowledge that there are limits and we have to be very clear about who is in the group, who is not. So we have to be surgical in our targeting. It's very important. I think that's the challenge, but certainly the answer is not saying, well, group don't exist, relation doesn't matter, and it's all down to individual. And most of all, let's arrest everyone. And as you said, James, the picture is, well, we have to be led by some values and evidence. It's 3 minutes past, but I just want to give 1 minute, the mic to Cecilia and Noemi. Cecilia, is there anything you would like to add to what we have said in your experience working with the team?
Something that has been very interesting for me, and I mean, I've been working on this data for a few years as well. So, and there were some things that I was expecting, some kind of findings that I was expecting, and some others that I was more surprised about. And something that comes to my mind now in relation to this question that I saw in the chat about the risk of surveillance and enforcement rather than support these young people. And I think something that we saw from your presentation today is that many of the factors that are risk factors for violent offending or being a suspect in a violent event, the same risk factors, the same relational risk factors also apply to being a victim of violence. And this was a surprising finding for me. I mean, of course, I knew about the victim-offender overlap, the victim-suspect overlap, but I was not expecting to find very similar factors, risk factors, across both offending or being a suspect of violence and violent victimization. So I think that's something that we have to keep in mind going forward. Is that when we talk about intervention, we are not necessarily implying a criminalization approach, but we are really implying support, especially considering that these are young people, and really the kind of intervention that we must design, of course, in partnership with the organizations that are directly involved with young people, are about supporting these people and trying to understand more about their relations, but really to identify a risk that might be a risk of committing violence, but might also be a risk of being a victim of violence. Yeah, I guess there were many more things that I could say, but I'm just very aware of the time. So yes.
Thank you, James. You have the hand up.
Just briefly, and addressing just a couple of the questions that are in the Q&A. I completely agree with all those points. One of the questions was around how do we use this data but avoiding this becoming police surveillance or intrusive, particularly where people have not yet committed serious crime. And hopefully I've put that across with there needs to be prevention, but a lot of this needs to be partner-led. And very often the police are not the best vehicle or the messenger to be doing this. Sometimes this will be the role of guardians, of social workers, of youth workers, which is why it is so absolutely important that they are both engaged with the police, but also have the resourcing and the funding they need to do some of this preventative work. The second point, there was, I think, an interesting question on how did we make this happen in terms of data? And the police can be extraordinarily protective of their data for very good legal reasons. Without getting too much into the detail for our colleague in Scotland, all of these things are achievable if they are done carefully and via governance. And predominantly, it is via the rigorous anonymization of data combined with the security and the kind of the procedures that good academic institutions like Cambridge have around the ethical sort of holding of data. If you have those things and these things are put in place, it is possible for police to share data to lead to outcomes like this. So it really is about doing the hard work around that up front, which is what I think we achieved here.
Thank you, James. Thank you. The final word I want to say to Noemi, this project has also allowed young scholars to be able to grow, and particularly Noemi as a statistician working for the first time with crime and police records. What's your take?
So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to James and Nuffield Foundation to be able to work in this project. And from a statistical point of view, I have to say that it was very interesting. The data lead to so many ideas of future research, even from a statistical point of view, there are so many things that can be done and different way of analyzing this data. And even with just methodologies that have been already used, we were able to discover so many insights and key findings. So we are working on other statistical models, so also that the results that we give to the police are even more robust in some sense from a statistical perspective. So yeah, I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to work with criminal data, and I hope the collaboration will continue. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to all the attendees. Thank you, James, for your time and your support throughout the project. Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Noemi, for your hard work during this long period. Thank you for all of you. And please go on the website, Violence Resource Center, Cambridge. You have the full report, the summary, and the slides. And so from me for today, thank you all. And
thank you to you, Paolo.
Indeed. And thank you everyone for joining the webinar.
Yeah, everyone,
and
of
for
course.
your
Yes.
very insightful questions as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.